Today then we are going to be talking about a Malbec, and if we're talking about a Malbec, almost inevitably these days it means we should be talking about Argentina. And this wine indeed comes from Argentina. It's Finca La Moras, which is sold by the co-op and is currently on a £2 reduction at £6.25. And when you look at the label of this bottle, it has two words on it which can be somewhat controversial. Barrel Select. I'll show you the label. And I say barrel select is a somewhat controversial term because that is certainly the case. Literally, one would expect it to mean that it is a blend of the best wines taken from the best barrels in the winery, where they've tasted them, select those that they think are the best, and blended them into a single bottle or a single cask, which then is bottled. Unfortunately, that isn't always the case. These days, the term barrel select has become more of an indication of quality, that we think this is one of the best wines that we've produced, rather than the literal translation of a barrel select. Whatever. What we do know with absolute certainty is that this wine has had time in oak. In fact, it's had time in a mixture of American oak and French oak. You may say to yourself, well, what difference does that make? Well, American oak, because its graining is different, tends to be more dominant in the flavours that it induces into the wine, and the result tends to be a little bit sweeter. French oak, that tends to be more subtle in the contribution it makes to the ultimate flavour of the wine. Slightly softer, it softens the wine, and it's slightly softer in style, and is likely to produce more spicy influences. And this particular example of Finca La Moras comes not from Mendoza, which is where large proportions of Argentinian wine, particularly Malbec, emanates, but from somewhere slightly north, San Juan, which is drier, hotter than Mendoza, and as I say, slightly north, and just bear in mind we're talking the southern hemisphere, so that means it's nearer to the equator. But what about the wine itself? We've talked about how it's selected, we've talked about how it's aged, we've talked about where it's from, but of course the actual crucial thing that we want to know is, what does it taste like? So let's have a look at the wine first. Pour ourselves a suitable sample. And here we have a very dark colour. And if I hold a white thing behind it, you'll see just how dark that colour is. Very nice fruity aromas. A little bit of something dark in there, and possibly chocolatey. We'll know when we come to taste it. On the palate then, let's have a go and see what we can discover from the palate flavours. First thing that strikes you is this is an intense wine. The fruit flavours are bright, bold, but as I say, high level of concentration in the wine itself, which makes it an attractive proposition. The fruit flavours are probably cherry, certainly particularly black cherry, I would have said, blackberry as well, and there's a slight influence of prune, the plum influences, but those plums that have been aged. What you don't get is raspberry, which is something that very often we'll find in Malbec, but that's not here. In this one, we're talking about more deeper fruits, and there is some real depth, not only in the fruit flavours, but in the wine itself. In terms of secondary flavours, we do get that chocolate that I was talking about on the nose. That certainly comes through on the palate. It's accompanied by nuttiness, and probably some baking spice influences. It's not quite rich enough for cinnamon, but those sort of allspice flavours that you get often at Christmas time from baking spices. And that is probably a contribution from the barrel aging. In terms of acidity, that's good. Nice freshness in the acidic balance, and that gives the wine that nice scent, as I say, of freshness. Tannin, which is the big enemy, if you like, and Malbec is notorious for having quite high levels of tannin, particularly French Malbec, but very little tannin here. Obviously, there's a bit, slightly, somewhat firm, perhaps, but certainly in no way intrusive, and very much keeping the whole thing nicely in balance. So what have we got altogether? A wine of depth, a wine of concentration, which I think is incredibly good value at just over £6. So I would certainly encourage you to have a look at, especially when it's on promotion, Finca Laboros at the co-op, your local co-op. There may be one just round the corner from you, and give this wine a go. I do not think you will be disappointed.